if you don't have your house in order at the beginning and you start growing and adding additional practices, what you are doing is not just multiplying, you are multiplying the chaos that you have already.
Do you have good data to make good decisions? I mean, that sounds super simple. It's kind of like a wasting people's time to come on here and say that. But if you don't have data that helps you make good decisions, then your financial house is not in order. By the time they get to 3, there's just no physical way they can be in 3 locations in any meaningful capacity. And that's where we tend to see, it's kind of that inflection point, man. You're either going to stay at 2 or if you want to keep growing, something's going to have to change.
We've seen practices lose, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars on the 3rd, 4th, whatever location that's just taken away from Bill, you call it the flagship dilemma. It's just taken away from the flagship practice.
Welcome back to another episode of Dental Marketing Theory. I'm your host, Gary Bird. I'm the owner of SMC National, where we help offices just like yours level the playing field against the big guys out there so you can grow the way that you want. But you can't grow if you don't have your house in order when it comes to your finances. Today, my guests, this is not their first time. They've been on the show many times. Jared and Bill from Duckett Lads. They're going to be breaking down the things that you need to have in place before you scale when it comes to your financial house. This is a great episode. If you're thinking about growing, you really need to know some basic numbers, and it really does boil down to math before you jump in. And we've all done that before. I'm an entrepreneur. I've kind of put the cart before the horse before. But today they're going to break down how to actually do this correctly. And there's a free resource down below, the 3 common mistakes that people make when it comes to scaling and their finances. So make sure you check that out and stay tuned. This is a great episode. All right, we are live for another episode. And today I have Bill and Jared, and we're going to be talking about the financial, getting your house in order before you grow. And nobody talks about this because everybody's just like, just go grow, get a loan, and we kind of move forward. I'll be honest with you, I've done that before. And so before we jump into this topic, if you're thinking about growing, this is the episode for you. If you're thinking about taking the next step, maybe buying another practice, maybe expanding your office, this is the show for you. But before we jump into it, I want you, number one, make sure to go check out Bill and Jared's podcast. We'll link that down below for you. I was just recently on it, and they have some great content that you should definitely check out. And number 2, we have a resource down below. We took the 3 common mistakes to avoid when scaling your practice portfolio. And from a financial standpoint, like the 3 common mistakes that they see, you can access that down below. It's free. It's very informative, great stuff. So let's jump into this conversation. Like what do we need to think through? Why can't I just like run and gun? Because that feels really good when I want to grow and I just start growing. Why can't I just do that?
Yeah, I'll jump in there first. And Bill, I'll say a quote. I don't know if this came from you. I don't think it did, but you say it all the time, is if you don't have your house in order at the beginning and you start growing, adding additional practices, what you are doing is not just multiplying, you are multiplying the chaos that you have already, right? And that's super easy to do, right? I mean, you've got chaos. I mean, just go buy another practice that's going to multiply it. You have to really take a step back and say, okay, let's just say you have one practice. Let's just keep it easy. You've got one practice. Is that practice dialed in from a system standpoint, from a profitability standpoint, from a KRA, KPI perspective, to really have your house in order first before you then go multiply? Because what you want to do is multiply the simplistic environment you've created, not the chaotic one. And everybody out there always running and gunning. I'll use your deal. It's running and gunning. Let's go buy another practice, get number 2, and 6 months later, get number 3. And then you're going to sit back and be like, crap, man, like I've got 3 times the mess that I had at the beginning. So don't just go out willy-nilly and buy practices. You have to get your house in order first from a lot of different aspects. But first get that one main baby, that baby of a practice in order.
What does that look like? So, and I love that quote, don't chaos. So if your life is chaotic, or if you're the centerpiece of everything, and you're gluing it together, even if it doesn't feel chaotic to you, don't scale that either, because you can't. If you don't have a lot of time, right? You don't want to add 4 more practices. So I can definitely speak to that. But from a financial standpoint, how do I know my house is in order to begin to grow? Like what are the first like health checks that I should be checking in on?
Yeah, so just a super simple flash test is, do you have good data to make good decisions? I mean, that sounds super simple. It sounds kind of like a wasting people's time to come on here and say that. But if you don't have data that helps you make good decisions, then your financial house is not in order. Now, what that could look like is that could look like somebody who just pulls up their bank account. Yep, we got enough money. We're good to go. We can keep spending. Or, oh, we need to go draw on a line of credit or whatever the case is. That's what it could look like. It could look like, hey, I haven't seen a profit and loss statement in 3 months, but that's okay. My accountant's working on it and I just don't want to answer their question. So we'll get to it when we get to it. It could look like, holy, whatever, at the end of the year, I owe a lot of taxes. I didn't realize I was going to owe a lot of taxes. Why is that? Well, it's because I made a lot of money, but I never knew that along the way. So, it could look like any number of things when it comes to something. But at the end of the day, you're just not getting good data to make good decisions. And if you're not making your decisions on data, to us, we think that's a mistake.
And I'll jump in there real fast and to maybe riff off this analogy of the data is kind of equate this a little bit to a dashboard of a car, right? And a lot of people, Bill, what you're saying is they don't even have a dashboard in their car to look at to know if they're going the right way, how much gas they have, et cetera. But how I would take it maybe one more step further on that dashboard is, first off, a lot of people are buying practice number 2 when they've got that check engine soon light on. And how do you get that check engine soon light off? Well, making sure that you're, first off, your overhead and all your KPIs are in a really good spot and you're growing. But then you're not just, how do I say this? You've got a really good set of tires underneath you to where you've gone for a while and you're getting really good gas mileage. Because if you've got a clunker here and you're driving fairly slow and you've never really revved that thing up to 60, don't go get another car yet. You've got to make sure you're hitting on all cylinders in that car. And that's looking at that dashboard, like Bill's saying, to make sure you're in a good spot. And I would say 50% of practice owners, Bill, I don't know if you agree with that. 50% of practice owners either don't have a dashboard or they're not looking at the right gauges on that dashboard to make sure they're in a good spot.
Yeah. So, and we host a mastermind, and this is like the number one thing is like, okay, what's your goals? And they'll say, I want to do this, this, and this. And it's like, okay, where's this, and this at? I don't know. Okay, go get clear on those numbers because we can't even help you turn right or left unless we know these basic numbers. And if you're guessing, you're probably going to be wrong. And that's what I see all the time in marketing and our mastermind, like everywhere. So now that someone's watching this and they're overwhelmed now, so they're like, stink, I got to know all my numbers. There's like and you know how dentists are. Dentists get extra overwhelmed at this because they're super analytical. And so they'll get into a number and they'll just like tweak out on that number. And then they'll realize there's like 4 billion numbers underneath that number. And then and then it just gets really, really messy. Okay. And I've seen that like spin off in the wrong direction. Also, it can like put you in a really bad spot mentally. So someone's watching this and they're like, okay, I need to know my numbers, but there's all these numbers. What are give me 4 or 5 basic numbers that I just got to have a grasp on so that way I don't go and spin my wheels and get 4 billion numbers to look at.
Yeah. So I think where you kind of got to start with that is even before the numbers, we kind of need to figure out what data are we going to be looking at as far as a global level. And you start with and you say, okay, everybody knows about financial statements, right? Heard of them, but what financial statements are we even looking at? And some people really don't know. So, you start with a profit and loss. Everybody kind of knows that. If you have multiple locations, you need to see each location listed separately so you can see how each one individually is doing, from a profit and loss perspective. We'll kind of get into some numbers buried in there in a second. You want to see your balance sheet. You see what kind of cash you have, what kind of debt you have. These are things that are important that a lot of people don't necessarily pay attention to. And I think the report that nobody talks about that Jared loves to talk about is the cash flow statement to know where's my money going. A lot of times, Gary, and business owners, they come in, they didn't learn the business of dentistry. So they come in and they maybe look at a few things, but they don't understand sometimes that what's on your profit and loss isn't necessarily what's going to hit your bank and like what, or what's going out the door. It's not necessarily entirely complete. So, you got to start with a very basic, framework. And let's figure out, first of all, what financial reporting are we going to do? Once you do that, then you got to say, okay, what's the framework we're going to do? Because you're right, people can overcomplicate things like crazy. And I think the more you overcomplicate financial data, the more it's going to become white noise. It's going to really overwhelm you, and you can kind of create something that's so complex that it's not meaningful, and you just ignore it. Right. So, our first piece of advice, or one of them, is keep things very simple. It doesn't have to be overly complicated. Gary, there's only a handful of categories that should be showing up on a P&L that you should be worried about when you kind of summarize them down. You got all your variable cost, or your, provider comp, you have your labs, you have your supplies, you have on your OpEx side, you have your facilities and general administrative and all
Can
this
you
stuff.
define variable cost and OpEx?
Yeah. So variable costs are like what you would say tend to change as you produce more. They tend to go up as you produce more. So think through like an associate comp. As they produce more, you pay more. Same with hygiene, typically is the same way.
Which is different than like your rent, because your rent stays the same no matter
Fixed
what.
cost.
It's different than your power bill because it's pretty much the same month, right?
Right. Exactly. And so if you kind of understand what these ratios should be, you can almost look at it as percentages, Gary. And like, am I in a right percentage to be in a healthy environment? Because guess what? If the percentages tend to work out, your overall profitability tends to shake out, where you want to. So, I mean, we can get into detailed numbers if you want, but that's a general framework there.
I love that. And the reason that's so important, I think, and understanding that is that a lot of times a lot of dentists have operated their business at a fixed expense for so long, 5 years, 7 years, they're very comfortable with it. They know it they don't even have to think about it. If I have this much money in the bank account, I know I'm good because I can just pay all my bills and then I can pay myself at the end and we're good. The problem is as you scale, you have a certain number of those expenses that stay the same, but then you have other ones that scale with your growth and causes a lot of problems because you think you're good because you're doing napkin math, but you're really not good. That's one of those ones that I've seen really creep up. I've done it before, and I've seen other people do it before where it's like, oh, I didn't consider that this particular number was going to climb with my growth.
Well, one thing to hit on there too, I'll riff off that fixed and variable component, is a lot of people, right, they're going to go buy that practice number 2, but they haven't fully maximized practice number 1. And if you think about what you're going to add with practice number 2, in this example, is basically all those additional fixed costs again, right? You're going to rack up an additional rent payment, additional utility payment, more marketing and that sort of thing, if that's a fixed component. But what you need to look at before, just don't add those additional fixed. Figure out on your existing practice what those fixed are. Keep them in check. Figure out what they are, keep them in check. And then, Bill, as you were saying, every additional dollar of production that you can produce, at X percentage that should go directly to the bottom line because the fix stays in check, right? So one of the key metrics we look at all times too is net production per operatory in a practice. And Bill, we like to say somewhere around 30-ish. Is that kind of where we're at now? 30,000 a month?
If you're doing 30, you're getting it done typically. 25 to 30 for depending on what kind of services you're providing. That tends to be a solid metric that we look at, that tells us a lot about not necessarily just do you have a production problem, but also, are you kind of stretching the capacity of your operators? Are you getting a point where you may be stretched for the amount of production you're doing and the number of ops you have? So that's a super meaningful, easy metric to track that we think everybody should look at. And 25 to 30 is pretty healthy on that.
So I'm going to take this in another direction with multi-location because there's been some things over the years that I've learned, and I would love your guys' thoughts on it. So there's numbers, and then there's these hidden things that go inside of a practice that you just don't account for and you learn over time. So initially when I got into dental, I worked with all single locations, all of them, like almost 100%. There was maybe 1 or 2 that had 2 locations. And all of a sudden they all started adding second locations. It was just like, and so we're like, hey, this is great. I had no idea what was going on or why it was happening or any of those kind of things. It was just like, great, you need marketed for this second location and let's do it. What I realized was these second locations struggled. The ones that didn't struggle were the ones that it was a husband and wife team and the wife would go start the other practice. I saw this over and over and over again. And those did well. And I started to look at it, and they, they knew their numbers. Let's say they had all their numbers in place, but there was this tangible thing that wasn't on paper, where it was like the business owner's not at this location, so nothing happens like the first location. Or if there was a husband and wife, it was the third location that would get them. And what would happen is the owner would have to leave the first practice, go over there and be like, I'm the owner. I'm going to make sure everything's running correctly. No, get all these numbers back in line. But guess what would happen when they did that? The first practice they left, numbers would start to tank. And I'm just talking about like high level numbers, like number of new patients would drop. Why? Because patient referrals would drop. Why? Because customer service would go down a little bit. Why? Because the owner wasn't there. And that would happen just a little bit across the board, but it would be meaningful enough to the overall performance of the office. And that's something that I've really seen over and over and over again, is like you almost can never produce an owner operated business at a second location without the owner operator being there. The numbers are not going to be as good.
Yeah, I would say we would agree with that. And a lot of times we can see two locations do pretty well depending on the doctor's skill set. But you're right. A lot of times they're driving production one side or the other. They're trying to drive culture one side or the other. And we always say, like, where the sun shines, that's where the grass grows. And that's exactly what you're saying. When they're focused over here, that practice is going crazy, but when they take their eye off the ball over here, we tend to see it losing traction. Now, with people who are pretty good operators, we usually find two practices they can kind of make it work, but three is where it usually
so
the
like
wheels.
two. You're saying there's two, they're really close to each other, and they practice at both of them.
Yeah, and they practice at both of them. Exactly right.
Agree.
Way they can be in three locations in any meaningful capacity, and that's where we tend to see it's kind of that inflection point, man. You're either going to stay at two, or if you want to keep growing, something's going to have to change. And that's where we tend to see some of this infrastructure that we try to talk about on the finance side. And I'm sure you on the marketing, that's where it has to come into place, Gary, or you're going to crash and burn.
Well, I think you said the key thing, Bill. Is it fair to say typically when you get up to two practices going into three, we say all the time that director of ops, that person needs to come into play and come first. Because usually what we see, if you don't have that person in place because that doctor is busy producing over here and can't go over here, they're not going to get anything done. And that director of ops is the person that can come in and implement those systems at the new practice, oversee the team and that sort of things, and actually get stuff done. And if they don't have that position from an accountability chart structure, it's really hard to wear all 3-4 different hats as an operator or as an owner to get that stuff done.
I did a podcast with Mark Costas, and I'm curious how this would play out in the financial side of things. So we had the same exact conversation because he actually went through this personally. He's seen people go through it. And I said, how do you solve this? Like, what do you do? Do you not grow? And he said, no, what you do is in your practice, you implement systems, and then you remove the key player in that system to see if it operates at the same level. And I'm like, what do you mean you remove them? He's like, go on vacation or give them another job and tell them they are not allowed to touch this process, whatever the process is. Let's say it's AR. Okay, we built it. It all works. Great. Who's in charge of it? Who's running it when you're not here? Great. Now you disappear or you're not allowed to touch it. You can work in the office. Do not answer questions about it. Do not touch it for 2 to 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever the timeline is. If it dips, then now the system is not sound, and it's going to dip when you go to your next practice. And then if you just have one thing that dips, it's not a big deal. But when everything in the whole practice dips, it's a huge deal. So he called it like redlining, I think, redlining the system. So you redline the person, get rid of them. What do you think about that from a financial standpoint? Like, how could we do something like that and stress test the first office before we jump off into office 2, 3, 4?
Well, I'm going to kind of go high level and give you our overview of how we see the world of business of dentistry. And I think you'll probably agree with this. And it is, I'm not going to lie, this is a traction-based model. But we look at, there's 3 core components of a business, and that's ops, that's finance, and that's sales and marketing. And, and there's different permeations of those, obviously, but those are the 3 big ones. And like Jared was saying, we have enough humility to say, you may disagree on the marketing side, but I think ops comes first. And if your ops are broken at your single location, then you should never even consider a second location. But to Mark's point, let's say that those things are dialed in and all of a sudden you have a really great practice. And we always like to say, how closely can you copy and paste that into another location, those process procedures, culture, whatever else you need to do in there. And then you start monitoring, you start tracking it. When it comes from the, to his specific point about how do you, know if it's performing, I think that we kind of come from a finance seat and say, you should look at each individual practice separately, and you should have, metrics starting with their net operating, their contribution margin will tell you, are they performing or not? And if they're not, we're going to be extremely deferential to those operators and say, hey, we're finance guys. We don't know why it's broken, but clearly it is broken. And, you provide that data, and, that's where someone like Mark would come in and probably would already know it, could feel it, but they see the data and they say, okay, we need to look at this because the system here is more of a person. It's not a true system or process. And we need to either fix that through training or maybe it's the wrong person. So, again, when you're speaking specifically to Mark's point, I think that almost entirely comes down to operations. I don't think financing is that complicated. I mean, to be completely honest, what we do, what your internal bookkeeper do.
So you're saying it's more math. It's the culture, removing people, adding people. That's more on the operator side that they got to figure that out.
We've historically found that. I mean, but again, you need to have good data and you need to have good, on your side, the sales and marketing team that's actually driving at bats and opportunities so people can, actually have opportunities to do their job and to have a profitable office. But when it comes down to it, when you're looking at these, we're able to pull out and look at a 10,000 foot view. And to us, it's very clear when an office is broken. And, we see this a lot in multi-practices. 5 to 8 practices, Gary, there is almost always one that is so broken, we almost recommend just get rid of it.
Yeah.
What are you doing? Get rid of it. You don't need this practice. Is it costing you money when you look at it?
I've seen so many times where like the second or third practice just absolutely sucks the practice dry, and the amount of stress that it causes.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people think, well, what's the worst that can happen? It breaks even and it's no, you have a huge amount of risk because you're not there. So you got sexual harassment stuff that could happen. You have clinical stuff that could go south. You have all this risk that a patient gets hurt, a team member gets hurt, well, all these things, right? And you could lose money. Like you could actually lose money to the point where you're losing more money at that location than you are at the one that you're making all your money at. I've seen it over and over and over again.
Same.
Fourth, whatever location, that's just taken away from Bill, you call it the flagship dilemma. It's just taken away from the flagship practice. And it makes so much more sense to just get rid of that practice. I hate to say it that way, but it's the issue with the owner, though. They just don't want to because they feel, they got that pride of ownership with it. Or is it the sunk cost fallacy or whatever? It's sunk so much. But if you don't pull the trigger and get rid of that practice, you're going to continue to, in my example, hundreds of thousands of dollars into it. So sometimes you just got to make the right decision to move on.
That's so good. All right. So I know we could talk about this stuff forever, but if someone wants to reach out to you, wants to learn more about what you guys do, what's the best way to get in touch with you guys and have you help them with the math part?
Yeah, best way to reach out to us is just go to our website. Go to ducketlad.com, 2 T's, 2 D's, hit the work together form. We've got a great YouTube channel. We're trying to be good marketers, right, Gary, like you, and trying to put good content out there. Check out our content. It takes a lot of work.
Huh? It's a lot of work, right? Most people are like, oh, marketing, you just do it. It's like, no, it's not. It's not that. I wish it was that. Nothing in business is easy. But
go check out our content. I think we put out some good stuff, and we just want to educate, help dental practice owners get better and achieve, whatever their goals are.
That's awesome. Good job, guys. Thanks so much for stopping in. Great episode. If you want the resource, it's free down below. Reach out to Duckett and Lads and ask them questions. They're very open. You don't have to pay them money to go ask them some questions. See what they think and see if they might be able to help you.
Thanks, Gary.
Thanks so much, guys.